"We're selling the family business," my dad announced at Sunday dinner. What he didn't know was that I'd already submitted a higher offer through my lawyer 3 days earlier. When I discovered why they chose the lower bid instead, I realized my own family had been planning to cut me out of everything I'd helped build. By the time you hear this story, you'll understand why I didn't just walk away quietly. I made sure they got exactly what they deserved. The business was everything. To our family, Hartwell Associates Landscaping started by my grandfather Vincent Hartwell in 1962 in the small town of Millbrook Falls, Colorado. What began as a one-man operation with a rusty pickup truck and a dream had grown into the largest commercial landscaping company in 3 counties. The associates part, that was supposed to include me, Camille Hartwell, at least that's what I'd believed my entire life. My grandfather built the company from nothing. He'd immigrated from Ireland with $50 in his pocket and an unshakable belief that in America, hard work would always pay off. He started by mowing lawns for wealthy families in the hills above town, slowly building a reputation for reliability and quality that nobody could match. By the time my father took over in the 1990s, we were handling major commercial contracts, office buildings, shopping centers, even the landscaping for the new Millbrook Falls Medical Center. I'd been working there since I was 14 years old, officially starting the summer before my freshman year of high school. Not because my parents made me, but because I wanted to. There was something magical about transforming an empty lot into something beautiful, something that would last. I started in the most basic role possible, watering plants in our nursery, sweeping the shop floors, organizing tools that the crew had left scattered after long days. But I was hungry to learn everything. By 16, I was riding along on job sites, watching our crew leaders plan installations, learning about soil composition and drainage systems. By 18, I was designing smaller residential projects myself. By 25, I was managing our biggest commercial accounts and had earned my landscape architecture certification through night classes at the community college 2 towns over. At 32, I wasn't just working at Hartwell Associates, I was running it. While my father handled the big picture sales meetings and schmoozing with city council members, I managed everything that actually kept the business functioning. Crew schedules, supply chain logistics, quality control, client relationships, payroll, equipment maintenance, seasonal planning. If it needed to happen for the company to succeed, it was on my desk. And then there was my older brother, Trevor. Trevor was 35 and had the unique talent of being perpetually disappointing while somehow remaining the golden child. You know that family member who gets praised for showing up while you get criticized for not being perfect? That was Trevor. Charming when he wanted to be, completely unreliable when it mattered. And somehow, always Dad's first choice, despite a track record that would have gotten any other employee fired within a month. Trevor had supposedly been learning the business for 15 years, but his version of learning involved showing up 3 days a week, leaving early for networking lunches that were really just drinking with his high school buddies, and taking credit for projects he'd had nothing to do with. He had an office with his name on the door and a title that sounded impressive, operations director, but I'd never seen him direct anything more complex than where the crew should go for lunch. The most infuriating part was how good he was at playing the part when clients or potential partners were around. Trevor could walk into a meeting, flash that practiced smile, talk about our family legacy and commitment to excellence, and have people eating out of his hand within minutes. He knew just enough about the technical side to sound competent in short conversations. And he had inherited Dad's natural salesmanship without any of the follow-through that actually builds lasting relationships. While I was working 60-hour weeks to make sure we met our deadlines and stayed within budget, Trevor was playing golf with potential clients and somehow getting credit for the relationships I'd spent years building. Waltz into the office on Thursday afternoon, look at the project schedules I'd been managing all week, make grand pronouncements about how we should handle things differently. Then he'd disappear again until the following Tuesday, leaving me to actually implement whatever unrealistic promises he'd made to clients. But Dad saw Trevor as the future face of the company. He's got the personality for this business, Dad would say. People like him. That's what matters in sales. It didn't seem to matter that half of Trevor's successful meetings ended with me having to call clients later to clarify what we'd actually agreed to do and what it would actually cost. Looking back now, I can see that I was never really being groomed to take over the business. I was being groomed to support whoever did take it over. Every additional responsibility they gave me, every promotion, every time Dad praised my work ethic, it wasn't preparing me for leadership. It was preparing me to be the perfect second in command. When Dad started talking about succession planning 2 years ago, I assumed it was finally time for the conversation I'd been waiting for my entire adult life. I'd proven myself in every possible way. I knew the business inside and out. I had relationships with every major client, every key supplier, every crew leader. I'd modernized our equipment tracking, implemented new safety protocols that had cut our insurance costs by 30%, and developed the client relationship management system that had helped us land our 3 biggest contracts. Conversations never seemed to include discussions about my future role. Instead, Dad would talk about bringing fresh perspectives to the leadership team and making sure the company can adapt to changing markets. When I tried to contribute ideas about long-term strategy, he'd nod politely and then change the subject to operational details, the stuff I was already handling. The first real warning sign came during a family barbecue last summer. Trevor had shown up for once, and he and Dad spent the entire afternoon talking about the vision for Hartwell's future. They discussed expanding into new service areas, potentially opening a second location, maybe even franchising the concept. I tried to join the conversation, after all. I'd been researching market opportunities for months, but they kept treating me like I was there to provide data, not make decisions. "Camille's got all the numbers," Dad said, when I mentioned the feasibility study I'd completed for expanding into snow removal services. "She can walk you through the details later, Trevor." Like I was his assistant, not his daughter who'd spent 3 months analyzing the opportunity and developing a comprehensive business plan. That night, I went home to my apartment above the art supply store on Main Street and tried to shake off the feeling that something fundamental had shifted. I told myself I was being paranoid. Dad was just excited to see Trevor taking an interest in the business for once. It didn't mean anything about my role or my future. But the feeling lingered, and it got stronger over the following months. The changes started small, so subtle that I almost convinced myself I was imagining them. Client meetings that I'd normally attend were suddenly just quick check-ins that didn't require my presence. Strategic decisions that Dad had always discussed, with me first, were being made and announced as facts. The weekly leadership meetings that had been just Dad and me for years suddenly included Trevor. Even though he contributed nothing beyond nodding and making vague comments about exciting opportunities. In October, Dad hired a business consultant, some hotshot from Denver, named Richard Pemberton, who specialized in family business transitions. He spent 2 weeks at our office interviewing everyone from crew leaders to our bookkeeper, supposedly. To assess our operational efficiency and growth potential, I assumed it was preparation for the kind of strategic planning session that every growing business needs periodically. But Pemberton never interviewed me. I asked Dad about it. He said they'd decided my time was too valuable to pull away from day-to-day operations. "We need you keeping the ship running while we figure out the big picture," he said. It sounded reasonable, even flattering. I was too important to spare for interviews. I was indispensable. It wasn't until weeks later that I realized being indispensable, 2 operations and being considered for leadership, were 2 entirely different things. The consultant's report, which I never saw, but which apparently recommended professionalizing the management structure and clarifying succession pathways, became the basis for a series of changes that gradually but systematically excluded me from decisions about the company's future. Board meetings that I'd attended for 3 years were suddenly executive level only. Financial reports that I'd always had access to were now distributed on a need-to-know basis. When I asked about the changes, Dad assured me that nothing fundamental was shifting. "We're just trying to create clearer boundaries between operational and strategic responsibilities," he said. "You're so good at the operational side, Camille. We don't want to burden you with the administrative stuff." Burden me. Like strategic planning for the company I'd devoted my life to building was some kind of unwelcome distraction from my real job. But here's the thing about family businesses. They're never really just about business. Every decision is filtered through decades of family dynamics, unspoken expectations, and assumptions about who you are and what you're capable of based on conversations that happened when you were 12 years old. In the Hartwell family, I'd always been the responsible one. The one who got good grades, who never missed curfew, who worked summer jobs while Trevor spent his breaks sleeping until noon and playing video games. I was reliable, responsible, and utterly predictable. I was the daughter they could count on to do what needed to be done without creating drama or demanding special treatment. But being reliable, I was learning, didn't make you irreplaceable. It made you a known quantity. Someone who could be counted on to keep doing what they'd always done, regardless of how their role might evolve or what they might want for themselves. Trevor, on the other hand, was the wild card. The son who'd dropped out of college twice, who'd tried and failed at 3 different business ventures, who'd once disappeared for 6 months to find himself traveling through South America on Dad's credit card. But Trevor was also the one with unrealized potential. The one who might surprise everyone if he just found the right opportunity, the right motivation, the right support system. I was the sure thing. Trevor was the investment opportunity. And in Dad's mind, apparently, when I asked about the changes, Dad assured me that nothing fundamental was shifting. We're just trying to create clearer boundaries between operational and strategic responsibilities, he said. You're so good at the operational side, Camille. We don't want to burden you with the administrative stuff. Burden me. Like strategic planning for the company I'd devoted my life to building was some kind of unwelcome distraction from my real job. But here's the thing about family businesses. They're never really just about business. Every decision is filtered through decades of family dynamics, unspoken expectations, and assumptions about who you are and what you're capable of based on conversations that happened when you were 12 years old. In the Hartwell family, I'd always been the responsible one. The one who got good grades, who never missed curfew, who worked summer jobs while Trevor spent his breaks sleeping until noon and playing video games. I was reliable, responsible, and utterly predictable. I was the daughter they could count on to do what needed to be done without creating drama or demanding special treatment. But being reliable, I was learning, didn't make you irreplaceable. It made you a known quantity. Someone who could be counted on to keep doing what they'd always done, regardless of how their role might evolve or what they might want for themselves. Trevor, on the other hand, was the wild card. The son who'd dropped out of college twice, who'd tried and failed at 3 different business ventures, who'd once disappeared for 6 months to find himself traveling through South America on Dad's credit card. But Trevor was also the one with unrealized potential. The one who might surprise everyone if he just found the right opportunity, the right motivation, the right support system. I was the sure thing. Trevor was the investment opportunity. And in Dad's mind, apparently, family businesses were built around investment opportunities, not sure things. The conversation that changed everything happened on a Tuesday in February. I'd spent the morning at the Riverside Shopping Complex, our biggest commercial account, dealing with an irrigation system failure that could have cost us the contract if it wasn't handled immediately. I'd coordinated with our supplier to get replacement parts overnight, rescheduled 3 other jobs to free up our best technician, and personally supervised the repair to make sure it met the property manager's exacting standards. By the time I got back to the office at 4 p.m., I was exhausted but satisfied. Another crisis handled, another client relationship preserved, another day of proving that Hartwell Associates could be trusted with the most demanding projects. I found Dad and Trevor in the conference room with someone I didn't recognize. A woman in an expensive suit with a briefcase full of documents spread across the table. They looked up when I walked in, and for just a moment, I saw something in Dad's expression that I'd never seen before. Not guilt exactly, but the kind of carefully neutral look that people wear when they're trying very hard not to show what they're thinking. "Camille," Dad said, standing up with that overly hearty tone that meant he was uncomfortable. "How did it go at Riverside?" I gave him a quick update on the repair, but I was more interested in the stranger at our conference table. Dad didn't introduce her, and she didn't introduce herself. She just smiled politely and continued organizing her papers like I wasn't there. "Dad," I said, after finishing my report, "what's going on?" He exchanged a look with Trevor, who shrugged in that way that suggested this conversation had been planned, but he wasn't particularly invested in how it went. "We're exploring some options for the business," Dad said finally. "Growth opportunities, strategic partnerships, that kind of thing." I waited for more details. When none came, I asked, "What kind of options?" Another look between Dad and Trevor. The woman in the suit continued pretending to be invisible. "Well," Dad said, settling back into his chair like this, was a casual conversation, instead of the first time in my life that I'd been excluded from a business discussion in my own company's conference room. "We've been approached by some investors." "Who are interested in what we've built here?" "Investors." The word hit me like a physical blow. "What kind of investors?" "A company called Greenscape Holdings," Trevor said, speaking up for the first time. "They specialize in acquiring family landscaping businesses and helping them scale up. We're interested in our client base and our reputation in the region." I looked at the woman in the suit. "And you are?" "Amanda Richardson," she said, finally acknowledging my existence. "I'm a business broker specializing in landscape industry acquisitions. I've been working with your father and brother to evaluate the potential for a sale." "A sale?" The word seemed to echo in the conference room, bouncing off the walls covered with photos of projects I'd managed. Certificates for awards I'd helped win. Thank you letters from clients whose trust I'd earned through years of 18-hour days and weekend. Emergency calls. "A sale," I repeated. "Not necessarily," Dad said quickly. "We're just exploring options. Due diligence. Seeing what's out there?" But I could see it in his eyes, in the way Trevor was suddenly very interested in his phone, in the organized efficiency of Amanda Richardson's briefcase. This wasn't exploration. This was preparation. "How long has this been going on?" I asked. "A few weeks," Dad said. "Maybe a month. We wanted to get a sense of the market before involving you in discussions that might not lead anywhere, involving me. Like I was a consultant they might hire rather than the person who'd been running their company for the better part of a decade." I excused myself from the conference room and walked out to my truck in the parking lot, staring at the building that housed everything I'd worked for, everything I'd thought I was building toward, trying to process what I'd just learned. My family was selling the business. They were selling it without involving me in the decision, without consulting me about the timing, without even bothering to tell me until I'd stumbled into their private meeting with a broker. But here's what they didn't know, what they couldn't have known because they'd been so careful to exclude me from their strategic conversations. I'd been planning my own future with Hartwell and Associates for months, and I had resources they didn't know about. 3 days later, when Dad made his announcement at Sunday dinner, I just smiled and nodded like the news was as shocking to me as it was to Mom, like I hadn't spent the previous 72 hours making phone calls, reviewing financial documents, and putting together the most important business proposal of my life. Because while they'd been meeting with brokers and entertaining offers from investors, I'd been quietly preparing to buy them out myself, and my offer was going to be substantially better than anything Greenscape Holdings could provide. Because before I tell you about the offer I made, you need to understand exactly what I discovered about their plans for me, and how I found out that being family doesn't protect you from being betrayed by the people who are supposed to love you most. The moment I walked out of that conference room and sat in my truck, something crystallized in my mind. For months, I'd been feeling pushed aside, excluded from decisions about the future of a company I'd devoted my life to building. So I'd spent the winter months doing exactly that. I'd had Hartwell and Associates professionally appraised by an independent firm that Dad had never heard of. I'd researched our competitors' recent sale prices to understand market valuations. I'd even had preliminary conversations with 2 different business loan officers to understand what kind of financing I could secure. The appraisal had come back at $2.8 million, higher than I'd expected, but not impossibly high. With my savings, a business loan secured against the company's assets and future earnings, and a private investor that Patricia had connected me I could put together an offer for $3.2 million. Cash purchase, 30-day closing, no contingencies. I'd been sitting on this information for weeks, waiting for the right moment to approach Dad about my interest in eventually taking over the business. I'd imagined it as a family celebration, Dad's relief at knowing his life's work would stay in the family, combined with his pride in seeing that I'd developed the business acumen to make it happen. Instead, I was learning about their secret sale negotiations from a stranger in a conference room. "Camille," Patricia said gently, "you know, you need to make your move now, right? Once they're committed to a particular buyer, it becomes much harder to change course." I knew she was right. I'd been planning to have a conversation with Dad about the future when the timing felt right, when I could approach it as a collaborative discussion about succession planning. But there was no more time for perfect timing. "Can you have the offer documents ready by Thursday?" I asked. "Absolutely." "But Camille, are you sure about this? Once you submit a formal offer, there's no going back to casual family conversations about someday maybe taking over the business. This will change your relationship with your father and brother permanently." "They already changed it," I said, just responding to what they started. Thursday morning, I walked into Dad's office with a manila envelope containing the most important business proposal of my life. He was on the phone with a client, but he gestured for me to sit down. I waited until he finished his call, trying to keep my breathing steady and my expression neutral. "Dad," I said when he hung up, "I have something I need to discuss with you." He leaned back in his chair, probably expecting me to bring up a scheduling issue or a problem with one of our suppliers. "What's on your mind?" I slid the envelope across his desk. "I want to buy Hartwell Associates." For a moment, he just stared at the envelope like it might explode. Then he looked at me with an expression I'd never seen before, complete bewilderment, like I'd just announced I was planning to fly to Mars. "What? Camille," he said finally, "where did this come from?" "It came from 15 years of working here and caring about what happens to this business. It came from wanting to make sure Grandpa's legacy continues. It came from believing that keeping Hartwell and Associates in the family is better than selling it to some investment company that'll probably cut staff and change everything that makes us special." He was quiet for a long time, reading through the offer documents. The number was right there on the first page. $3.2 million, cash purchase, 30-day closing. This is ... This is a serious offer," he said eventually. "It's a better offer than Greenscape Holdings is going to make you," I said. "And it keeps the business in the family." Dad set the papers down and looked at me like he was seeing me for the first time. "How long have you been planning this?" I paused, watching his face for some sign of the pride and relief I'd hoped to see. Instead, he looked ... uncomfortable, like I'd presented him with a problem instead of a solution. "Camille," he said slowly, "this is ... This is very impressive. But there are things you don't understand about the situation." "What things?" I felt something cold settle in my stomach. "What does that mean?" "It means there are aspects of business ownership that require a different skill set. Strategic thinking, relationship building, long-term planning. You're brilliant at execution, but..." He trailed off, but I could fill in the rest. But I wasn't leadership material. I didn't have the vision to grow the company, but I was better suited to following someone else's directions than making my own decisions. "Dad," I said, keeping my voice level, "I've been doing strategic planning for this company for years. I've built relationships with every major client we have. I developed the expansion plan for our snow removal services. I negotiated our equipment, financing deals. I created the safety protocols that cut our insurance costs. What exactly do you think I'm missing?" "What about Trevor?" I asked. "Is he part of Greenscape's plans for the future leadership? And me? They're very interested in retaining you as operations manager? They recognize your value to the organization?" Operations manager. Same role I'd been doing for years, except now I'd be doing it for people who'd never known my grandfather, who'd never understood what this company meant to our family, who'd see our employees as cost centers and our clients as revenue streams. I stood up, leaving my offer documents on Dad's desk. "And Dad, my offer expires in 48 hours. After that, I'll be making other plans for my future." I'd come back to the office around 3 p.m. after spending the morning at a job site dealing with A delivery problem that could have delayed a major installation. I was heading to my desk to catch up on paperwork when I heard Dad's voice coming from the conference room. The door was closed, but the walls in our old building were thin enough that conversations carried. My heart started beating faster. Was talking about my offer, but not to Mom or our accountant. The formality in his voice suggested this was a business call. Right, exactly. Which is why I think we need to accelerate our timeline. Can we have contracts ready by Monday? Monday. My offer had given him 48 hours to respond, which meant his deadline was Saturday morning. And he was talking about having contracts ready by Monday, contracts with someone else. Oh. Trevor agrees, Dad continued. We think the greenscape opportunity provides better long-term stability for the business. The only complication is Camille, Dad said, and his voice dropped lower. She's going to be ... difficult about this. Pressed closer to the wall, straining to hear. Attached to the business. Emotionally attached. Might try to cause problems if she feels like she's being pushed out. Pushed out. Like I was some disgruntled employee rather than his daughter, who'd devoted 15 years to building the company he was about to sell. Perfect. And you're confident about the timeline? Because once we tell Camille that we're moving forward with Greenscape, I want to have everything locked in. She's smart and she's resourceful. If she has time to think about alternatives, she might come up with something that complicates the deal. Had to lean against the wall. The casual way he was discussing how to manage me, how to prevent me from complicating his preferred deal, was breathtaking in its betrayal. The call ended, and I heard Dad's chair scrape against the floor as he stood up. I quickly walked to the break room and busied myself making coffee, my hands shaking as I tried to process what I'd just learned. They weren't considering my offer. They had never intended to consider my offer. Dad had already committed to selling to Greenscape Holdings before I'd even presented my proposal. My offer. The one that was higher than theirs. The one that would keep the business in the family. The one that represented months of careful planning and preparation was nothing more than an inconvenience to be managed. I arrived knowing exactly what Dad was going to announce and exactly how he was going to frame it. I'd spent the weekend coming to terms with the fact that my own father had chosen to exclude me from the most important decision in our family's business history. But I'd also spent the weekend making some decisions of my own. Kids, Dad said after Mom had served dessert, your mother and I have some news to share about the business. It's been developing for a while, Dad said, not quite meeting my eyes. Greenscape is a well-established company with resources to help us grow in ways we couldn't manage on our own. They've made us a very generous offer. So I'd spent the winter months doing exactly that. I'd had Hartwell Associates professionally appraised by an independent firm that Dad had never heard of. I'd researched our competitors' recent sale prices to understand market valuations. I'd even had preliminary conversations with 2 different business loan officers to understand what kind of financing I could secure. The appraisal had come back at $2.8 million, higher than I'd expected, but not impossibly high. With my savings, a business loan secured against the company's assets and future earnings, and a private investor that Patricia had connected me with, I could put together an offer for $3.2 million. Cash purchase, 30-day closing, no contingencies. I'd been sitting on this information for weeks, waiting for the right moment to approach Dad about my interest in eventually taking over the business. I'd imagined it as a family celebration, Dad's relief at knowing his life's work would stay in the family, combined with his pride in seeing that I'd developed the business acumen to make it happen. Instead, I was learning about their secret sale negotiations from a stranger in a conference room. Camille, Patricia said gently,